Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Is my microphone working? Am I heard? Good. You can hear me. So then we'll start. Thank you all for coming. This is the second semester here at St. Scholastica, and we're continuing with the series we started in the fall on sustainable living. This is the fourth in the series of 6 programs that we're doing this academic year, 2017 and 18. And I'm delighted that you're here. My name is Tom Morgan. I am the director of the center, the Alworth Center for the Study of Peace and Justice at the college. These lectures are sponsored by the Alworth Center and funded in part by the Warner Lecture Series of the Manitou Fund, the DeWitt and Carolyn Van Ivre Foundation, and by Mary C. Van Ivre, in memory of William Van Ivre, a former trustee of the college. Additional support has been received from the Global Awareness Fund of the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation, and from Wagner Zahn Architecture, the Royal D. Alworth Junior Institute at the University of Minnesota Duluth, the UMD Department of World Languages and Cultures, Reader Weekly of Duluth, Citizens Climate Lobby, and Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, and numerous other private sources. Thank you all so much for your support. This wouldn't happen without that kind of support. Before I get further into tonight's business, I want to just plug a program that's going to be in this auditorium tomorrow night. It's not connected with the Alworth Center at all. It's sponsored by the Warner Reading Series here at St. Scholastica, and will feature poet Sharon Olds, and that will be at 7:30 here in the Mitchell Auditorium. Sharon Olds is the winner of several prestigious awards, including Pulitzer Prize and National Book Critics Circle Award. She is known for writing intensely personal, emotionally scathing poetry, which graphically depicts family life as well as global political events. So after tonight's experience, then come back Friday night for that experience with a Pulitzer Prize winning poet. Back to the Alworth Center, we have, as always, sign-up sheets in the lobby. If you're not on our mailing list or email list and you want to be, this is your opportunity to do that, so please fill that out and print clearly so that I can read it and we get your email right if you want that. Also, you all should have been handed goldenrod evaluation forms. From time to time we do that, and so I like to hear from you about how the program is going and how the speaker is doing. So please do that. There are also out in the lobby, you've probably noticed this when you came in, several organizations with showing off their wares and what they're all about. They're all local environmental organizations or peace and justice organizations, so pay them a visit too. Next week, after this lecture, we invite you all to come to Beaner's Central Coffee House, 324 North Central Avenue, on Tuesday, 7 p.m. You all should have a flyer about that. Excuse me again. We'll talk about what we hear tonight and what our speaker says, and Allison Hoxie will facilitate the conversation. She knows a lot about solar and wind power, and so her biography or her credentials are in this flyer that you all got, so I invite you to do that. After the talk, you're invited I encourage you to ask questions. We have 2 microphones here. Come to the stage and ask your questions in turn. The speaker will recognize you in order. Community people, I'm delighted you're here, but give a little deference to the students. Let them ask questions first. I'd like to see that. They have arguably the most inquisitive minds of all, so defer to them if you can, but we'll try to get everybody in. On the screen, to your right and to your left, in front of me, we're displaying the text of tonight's lecture through technology called real-time captioning. Although we anticipate a high-quality format, there will inevitably be errors that are inherent to the technology. Nevertheless, research indicates that many viewers benefit from captioning, including those with hearing loss. Notice we have new equipment this year. A special thank you to the Edwin H. Eddy Foundation, whose generous support makes this inclusive service possible tonight. Thanks so much to the Eddy Foundation as well. Speaking of technology, if you've got any with you in your pocket, like cell phones or any other things that squawk and beep, it's a good time to turn them off right now so we can give attention to the speaker and not disturb those around you. Our speaker this evening is a Washington, D.C. based environmental analyst working to connect the dots among issues of climate, energy, water, food, and security. She's the founder of One Planet Strategies, where she does research, writing, and editing as an independent consultant. Previously, Ms. Larson was one of the incorporators of the Earth Policy Institute, where she led the research team from 2001 to 2015. With Lester Brown and colleagues, she co-authored The Great Transition, there it is behind me, I think, Shifting from Fossil Fuels to Solar and Wind Energy. That book, by the way, should be on sale after the lecture. And she also contributed heavily to the Earth Policy Reader. Her research covers a range of topics, from bike sharing and bottled water to food security, forest cover, and crop yields. She's also written on topics ranging from natural resources availability to population growth and climate change. She holds a degree in Earth Systems from Stanford University. Her research has been translated into various languages and has been featured in a number of print, online, and radio publications. Prior to the creation of Earth Policy Institute, Ms. Larson was a staff researcher at the World Watch Institute. At World Watch, she made contributions to The State of the World and Vital Signs. These are a series of books dealing with environmental issues. She's done field work looking at salt-tolerant plants on the Chilean coast and poison dart frogs in the Peruvian Amazon. And she continues to enjoy the outdoors, near and far from her home in the nation's capital. She lives with her husband, Bill, an energy analyst, and their daughter, Mandolin, age 6. They have no pets, but they have lots and lots of plants in their home in Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Janet Larson.
Thank you. You all look beautiful tonight. Thank you for coming. Did you know that we are at the start of a great transition? Can you feel it? Did you know that there are 4 cities in the United States now that get 100% of their energy from renewables? Did you know that in Iowa, they get more than 1/4 of their energy just from wind? We can see glimpses of this transition elsewhere in the United States. If Texas were a country, it would be number 6 in the world for wind generating capacity. Looking around the world, you can look in South Australia, where even if coal were delivered completely for free, it's still cheaper to install solar panels and get your electricity from the sun. In Spain, wind is close to overtaking nuclear power for their #1 energy source. And China even is generating more electricity now from the wind than from its nuclear facilities. These are parts of the puzzle that's coming together to create this great transition in energy. Now, energy transitions are not new. Beginning several centuries ago, we transitioned from wood to coal. Go back 150 years ago or so, when the first oil well was drilled in Pennsylvania, and the world's whales breathed a sigh of relief because we wouldn't need their oil anymore. Today's energy transition is exciting because it's compressing history. We're seeing technologies move so quickly that 50 years of change are happening in a decade. What's more, is every person in this room can be part of the energy transition, because the energy transition is a democratization of energy. We're not reliant on countries far away to provide us with their oil that we can burn when we drive around. We can produce energy directly over our own heads. So I'll take you on a bit of a tour through the world's major sources of electricity, so we can see where we've been and where we're going. And you can look for these puzzle pieces. Think of putting together a jigsaw. Right now we have parts of the border of this new energy economy, but we're starting to see the shapes emerge. And frankly, it's quite exciting. So when we look at where the world is getting electricity from today, clearly what dominates? It's coal. Coal has been king for quite some time now. This data, it takes a while for the world's data to come together. It's a couple years old. Right now the coal part of the pie will be shrunk a little bit more. But in 20 years or so, you wouldn't even recognize this pie. I can guarantee it. Things are changing, and they're changing incredibly quickly. And this is why. The world's fastest growing source of energy today is solar power. Annual percentage growth in solar is 132%. It's followed by wind and then biomass geothermal. Coal's growing somewhat, depending on where you look in the world, hydro, natural gas, oil, and nuclear power. So how did we get there? Well, coal. Beautiful coal. We have seen much of the progress in our country, much of our development has been built on the back of coal. Coal is an amazing source of energy, incredibly energy dense. What coal is basically fossilized sunlight, sun, the original source of energy. Now, however, we're finding we can go directly to the source for sun. We no longer need to be as reliant on coal. In fact, in the United States, as you can see, coal use peaked in 2007. Since then, it's fallen by 37%. There's a number of reasons for this. You can look at lower natural gas prices as a big one, also air pollution regulations, local campaigns. Do you remember what you were doing in 2007? In 2007, I got on my desk a big report from the US Department of Energy. It was talking about the new renaissance in coal, and it talked about the hundreds of new coal-fired power plants that would be built around the country. Well, as you can see here, that renaissance has not happened one by one. Those proposals were shelved, and existing plants have been shuttered. Around the country, there are 523 coal-fired power plants, over half of them just in the last few years, 266 to be precise. As of yesterday, you have to check this number every day, it changes. 266 of the nation's 523 coal-fired power plants have announced that they would retire, or they're getting ready to close. So there's 264 left to go. In Australia, in Canada, many countries in Europe, they have also passed this point of peak coal. And despite recent attempts by some officials in the government to intervene in the markets and to try to protect this dying industry, US and European utilities, Australian utilities, they're looking elsewhere for the future as they're putting forth their plans. And importantly, Wall Street is also looking elsewhere. It's very hard to get investors in coal these days. And here's one reason why excitement for coal has been waning. This is a picture taken in Beijing. China burns just about as much coal, just slightly more coal than the rest of the world's countries combined. In China now, the blue sky days are rare enough to be counted in official government statistics. And in China, there was an interesting natural experiment that happened with coal. In northern China, where it's very cold, coal's used for heating. And so it was subsidized for the government at very, very cheap rates, whereas in the south, it was not subsidized and coal use was much lower. And so what a team of researchers looked at was controlling for all other factors. They found that they could link this heavier coal burning in North China with a reduction of life expectancy on average of 5 years. Air pollution in China has become a serious political issue, and that is one of the reasons why the Chinese government is working very hard to get off coal. Now, when we completed the book, The Great Transition, in 2015, we were looking at the new data from China, and it was looking like China's coal use had started to go down, which no one really believed, and we debated quite a bit. Is this just a blip, or will this continue? Well, China's coal use peaked in 2014, and it's gone down each year since. These are not just the official numbers, which we've found from China you could take them or leave them, but they've been confirmed by people looking at satellite images, looking at ships coming in and out of the port of coal deliveries, coal trains, and indeed coal use in China has actually started to go down. Coal use has gone down, coal imports have gone down, and it's in part because of these major concerns about air pollution. China's put forward a number of environmental regulations, and they're moving forward very quickly with wind and solar. The country now has official national plans to increase the number of blue skies days that we can see. The picture, however, is not quite the same in India, where coal consumption is increasing very quickly. And remember that US government report about the coal renaissance I talked about? China has something very similar, where in the last few years they talked about doubling down on coal. Yet, at the same time, India's pollution in many of its cities is worse than in China. There's growing opposition to coal. And the government, while saying they were going to double down on coal, have also been doubling down on solar energy. They doubled the taxes on coal, partly to fund solar development. In a way, it was sort of the way for the coal industry to atone for their sins. They were taxed to pay for new solar. But now, in more and more places across India, solar prices are actually undercutting the grid average in many places. And so how long this coal trajectory will continue to rise, I think, is a big question. And one of the ironies we see in the great transition is that Coal India, which is the world's largest coal producer, they're actually installing solar panels on their facilities to cut costs. So when Coal India is becoming a major purchaser of solar, you have to wonder how well the industry will be able to fare. So when we look at the fossil fuels together, this is from the world perspective. You can see, we talked about coal worldwide has gone up. It started to go down, large part because of China, because of the United States. Oil use, we'll come back to that a little bit later, since oil is not used as much for electricity. And natural gas. Natural gas is on that steady upward trajectory. So what do we know about natural gas? Well, for one, there's a huge boom, of course, in the United States. We're finding new ways to get oil out of the ground. With that oil, in many places, comes natural gas. There's also special fields being developed. When you talk to people in parts of Pennsylvania where we did some research, there's a mixed enthusiasm for this new technology. Most people are excited for economic development, unless it's going to be right in their backyard, and they have to deal with that, the trucks coming through, the waste. New research is coming out showing the enormous amount of methane that's escaping through the country's natural gas pipelines. So while for many years, many in the environmental field were excited about natural gas, saying it was a great bridge fuel to the future until we could get to the real renewables. I think we have yet to see how that will be played out, but it's certainly something to watch. It's definitely brought us to a new future. Did you know that in recent years there have been more earthquakes in Oklahoma than in California? And that's because of the wastewater injection practices for this hydraulic fracturing to access the oil and gas from these porous rocks underground. Next, we have nuclear as a major source of energy. Another source of energy that in the environmental field people are very divided. For one, the direct carbon emissions from a nuclear facility can be very low. When you look at the whole life cycle costs, the picture's a little bit different. And the world has mixed experience with nuclear energy. This is a picture taken in 2001 from the Fukushima Daiichi reactor in Japan that went through a meltdown after the earthquake and resulting tsunami. Still, every day, hundreds of tons of water are being dumped at this site to keep continuously cooling the reactor. The Japanese government is having a hard time recruiting people, of course, to come work and stay. The whole area has still been evacuated since this disaster. Recent official cost estimates from the Japanese government estimate that this will cost up to $200 billion, though depending on the level of water contamination in the area, the cost of this nuclear power disaster could be up to about $630 billion. Now, this is Japan. Japan is one of the world's most technologically advanced societies. So, for many countries around the world, Fukushima was a warning sign. After the Fukushima event, Germany, Switzerland, Belgium were among the countries that decided to phase out their nuclear generation. Even France, which many people hail as a nuclear energy superpower, they don't have the most reactors, but they get the highest percentage of their energy from nuclear power. The French government has decided to cut their reliance on nuclear now at about 75% of their electricity supply to about 50% by 2025, and they're doing that by investing heavily in wind and solar. So that happened after Fukushima, but even before Fukushima happened, the world's nuclear industry was in trouble. Global nuclear energy electricity generation peaked in about 2006. It's gone up just a little bit. It's still below the peak. It's gone up in the last few years because of new project starts going on board in China. And you can see here, this is a chart from Michael Schneider, who does an annual review of the world's nuclear energy facilities. And it shows over history, on the top part are nuclear startups when projects came online and started generating power. And on the bottom we have retirees. So you can see that the heyday for nuclear facility development was really in the 1980s, which means that the plants now, most of the ones online, are nearing that 40-year typical lifespan. In the United States, a lot of these plants are getting extensions to continue power generation, yet what we're seeing more and more recently is that utilities are deciding actually to take their nuclear facilities offline just because nuclear energy, which had been hailed as a fuel too cheap to meter, is now just too expensive to use. We've found that nuclear energy is costly from cradle to grave. Building new nuclear facilities have become more expensive over time. So usually as you get to know a technology, costs go down. You can think of it, computer costs certainly go down, solar and wind costs go down, battery costs go down. Nuclear is becoming more expensive over time. construction delays and cost overruns are more common than not. Just in the last year, 16 new facilities were supposed to come online, but only 3 did. In the last few months of 2007, in this country, there have been 4 projects that were sort of the last hope of the nuclear industry. 2 of the 4 projects finally got shelved in South Carolina. The other 2 are still going on in Georgia, though we don't know how long they'll continue. Unfortunately, when those projects, the summer plant projects in South Carolina were canceled, that was after $9 billion had already been spent. And do you know who's helping to finance that? Ratepayers. People like you and me. We're paying for these facilities to build. That will never go online and never generated power. We also saw in 2017 Toshiba Westinghouse, one of the world's major nuclear facility constructor, provider, engineers, they filed for bankruptcy protection. France's Areva, the national nuclear industry, they were bailed out by the government with a $5.3 billion cash payment and then subsequently broken up. Even in South Korea now, one of the world's few countries that was completing new projects in recent years, they've said that their eventual long-term goal is to have zero nuclear, and a large part of that is for cost reasons. So we're not seeing countries with freely operating market economies moving toward nuclear. Wall Street also is staying away from nuclear. Plants are costly to build. They're also costly to decommission. To close down 2 reactors in California recently, it cost $4.4 billion. The cost can escalate quite a bit. There was a 4-reactor site in the United Kingdom that ended up costing about $130 billion to decommission because it had weapons-grade plutonium on site. And with nuclear, we still, around the world, no country has solved the waste disposal problem. But even before you get to that, generally economics are not in favor of nuclear. And we can see here I mentioned in China, wind overtook nuclear power a few years ago, and it's continued the lead. I think wind is going to, considering projects that are planned to be built, I think wind will continue to maintain this lead over nuclear. And just to note, when people talk about energy, I know there's some engineers in the room, the units there are terawatt hours. This is actual generation, not just capacity. So when people talk about energy capacity, a nuclear facility that can operate pretty much around the clock has a pretty high capacity compared with solar and wind. So when you want to look, and this is comparing apples to apples, actual wind generation did exceed nuclear generation in China. It will keep growing because China's wind goal is for 200 gigawatts of capacity by 2020. You can see here they've already beaten their 2020 goal. China's overall wind power potential is 10% more, I'm sorry, it's not 10%, 10 times more than the country's entire electricity demand. It could be supplied just with wind. That was a study done by researchers, Chinese researchers and a team at Harvard, which looked at the world's major carbon emitters and found that wind could meet the needs of most of the world's top 10 carbon emitters. So on a cost front, on a safety front, not to mention a proliferation front, we're seeing wind beat nuclear in a number of ways. Wind is pretty amazing. It's abundant, it's widespread, it's easily scalable, and as I mentioned, it's increasingly cheap. You can see wind has been growing at a pretty quick trajectory since about 2005. This is the world's wind-generated electricity from 1990 to 2016. Growth rates are about 25% per year. The total amount of wind-generated electricity is about to about enough to power over 100 million US homes. So it started at a small scale, but it's becoming very powerful. You can see here some of the world's leaders in wind-generated capacity. China took the lead a few years ago, and China now has more added just in the last year, more wind power capacity than a number of leading countries, the UK and those that follow the UK on the graph. We can't see the labels, but Canada, France, Brazil, and Italy. And in many of these countries, as wind is going up, coal use is going down. In Denmark, wind is now the cheapest electricity source, about half the cost of coal or natural gas. As I mentioned, Denmark routinely gets 40% of the country's power or more from wind. Other countries with high wind shares include Portugal, Spain, and Ireland. In Germany, there's 4 states now that are getting more than half of their power from wind. And when I started looking at this, 15 years ago or so, everybody said, there's no way you could get up to half your power generation from wind. It's too variable, it's too unpredictable. But it's amazing when you look at the graphs of how the wind forecast is hour by hour, a day in advance, and the way power is moved about, it's pretty incredibly accurate. It's pretty exciting. And now here in the Midwest, we're having new wind contracts signed at about 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. That compares with National Grid average service of about 10 to 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So wind is increasingly cheap. Where I come from on the East Coast, wind was often plagued by the NIMBY problem, not in my backyard, but what we've found in many farming and ranching communities around the country. It's a PIMBY issue. Put it in my backyard. I want that wind turbine there because I know that I can get tens of thousands of dollars in royalty from that wind power and continue to farm or graze on my land because the actual footprint of the wind turbine is relatively small. Compare that to, say, putting a tenth of an acre or an acre in ethanol that would garner about $300 versus tens of thousands of dollars of wind royalties. The choice becomes pretty clear. And another abundant and widespread and increasingly cheap source of energy is solar. We are in a major solar revolution. It's often said in energy circles that the solar energy that hits the Earth in 1 hour could power the global economy for 1 year. Solar is that abundant. 1 hour to power the global economy for a year. It's widespread. It's usable in every country on Earth, even cloudy Germany or Duluth or in San Francisco. And these photovoltaic panels, PV, it's a fantastic way to harness that because there's no moving parts, so things don't get worn down as quickly. They can exist on rooftops, on parking lots, on marginal land. Under the George W. Bush administration, what he had is no child left behind educational policy. I like to call for a no rooftop left behind solar policy where every rooftop could have something on it, whether it's solar panels, solar water heaters, green roofs to retain rainwater. There's no reason that you should get in an airplane and fly over and see tons of empty roof space. That could be parks or energy generation or all of the above. So why is solar skyrocketing like this? Large part because of the costs. I got my panels installed on my roof in 2009, and now they're about 75% cheaper. I'm still glad I have them, though. Costs are falling fast. In 1972, we were looking at $24 a watt. Now we're well under 74 cents per watt, and now we're well under, so 1972, $70 per watt. In 2014 or so, we were at 70 cents per watt. So costs are falling fast. A large part of that is because of Germany. Germany was one of the first countries in the world to have aggressive solar and wind favorable policies like a renewable portfolio standard, feed-in tariffs, having a guaranteed price for power producers to be feeding energy into the grid. And because of the Germany's policies increasing demand, China got into the solar business, and they figured out how to churn out panels incredibly cheaply. And for a number of years, China, that yellow line on the graph, they couldn't afford to use the panels they were putting out and sending to Europe. But in recent years, they have been able to afford it, and now China leads the world by far in solar installations. China's goal for 2020 solar installations was 20 gigawatts of PV. So you can see, there we go. Yeah, their 2020 goal was about here. So they beat that a few years ahead. Then they raised their goal to 50 gigawatts, and now China's goal is for 100 gigawatts by 2020. They may well get there next year. India also has a goal of 100 gigawatts of solar for 2020. They've had to increase their goals as well because they kept beating their targets. So together with China and India, if they both come forward with 100 gigawatts of solar, that will triple what we have, that would double what we have around the world today. And the scale of some of these projects are amazing. They go from rooftop level to major fields. So this is one of Apple's fields. This is in Maiden, North Carolina. But what works for Apple on an industrial-sized field, they have them in North Carolina, they have them in China, they have them in a number of places. The same technology works around the world for the 1.3 billion people without access to electricity at all. People who could wait 5 or 10 years in hopes that they will get a power distribution line to their village now can put up community-scale solar panels or even a single panel on a rooftop, and kids can now read at night with a single light bulb and do their homework. It's amazing because putting these systems on is far cheaper than building a centralized power station, building all the distribution lines. Aid organizations are realizing that in Bangladesh. The World Bank has been installing solar panels at a rapid rate. Each month, they were putting up 70,000 new solar home systems with World Bank funding in Bangladesh. In India, they find that to replace a kerosene lamp with one solar panel that can charge a compact fluorescent light bulb or an LED lamp and a cell phone, one, it lowers your monthly outlay for energy, and that system pays for itself in 3 years, after which you're getting all your light, all your charging for free. So it ends up being a remarkable solution around the world at big and at small scales. A different way to use solar is with this concentrating solar power. You may have seen some of these projects in Nevada or California if you've ever flown over that part of the country. What they do is they have these mirrors concentrating sunlight to drive a steam turbine or an engine. They tend to work very well in deserts. Most of the projects now around the world are centered in the United States and in Spain. There's about 5 gigawatts around the world total, though China just announced recently plans for a 2 gigawatt concentrating solar power project. There's huge potential, of course, for North Africa and the Middle East. Europe is excited about that because they see that as a major source of stable energy. And I say stable energy because concentrating solar power can be paired with energy storage in molten salt to generate energy well after the sun goes down. So there's a project in northern Chile by a Spanish company, Abengoa, that can store the energy for 18 hours. So basically, it can be around-the-clock solar energy production. Then there's also solar water heaters. They can live on your rooftop, heat water directly. They're very popular in certain parts of the world. In Israel, they're used on over 85% of homes. Germany and Austria, they're also very popular. South America has recently been adopting this technology. More recently, in Argentina, on the presidential rooftop, they installed one of these systems. Brazil, before the recent government transition, they had a social program mandating that all new buildings built for the poorest of society had solar water heaters. And in China now, over 170 million households have this technology as well. In cities, they have laws or urban building codes mandate that they're used, but they're also used at the village level. And the way that they sold these to people is a few enterprising entrepreneurs would go village to village with a solar water heating system, ask a villager for an egg. They'd bring out the egg and put it in the tank, and within minutes, you have a hard-boiled egg. Everybody who had never taken a hot shower, never had hot water, immediately sold, and these things spread like wildfire. It was a pretty exciting way for people to get hot water who had never had a reliable supply of it. So we can use the sun to produce heat and to produce electricity. We can also rely on the heat of the earth within the earth itself. Geothermal has a multiple of uses. It can be used directly for heating water, heating space. It can also be used in certain locations for power generation. So the highest geothermal power activity is, of course, around the so-called Ring of Fire, around the Pacific, Japan, Indonesia, New Zealand, the Pacific Islands, the western United States, Africa's Great Rift Valley. If anybody's been to Iceland, geothermal power is very evident, both as an electricity source, and that's why Iceland's such a major producer of aluminum, because they have this great, very cheap source of electricity. But in Iceland, geothermal takes care of close to 90% of all Iceland's space heating. It's also used for pools, fish farms, greenhouses, snow melting on sidewalks. So it's pretty exciting. So those are direct uses for power generation. The U.S. is actually the leader, mostly with our Western projects. But overall, the scale is much smaller than the other sources of energy. It's rather underutilized. There's quite a bit of undeveloped geothermal potential. MIT did a study looking at the United States that showed we could get about 500,000 megawatts of power using these enhanced geothermal systems. Other countries have fairly ambitious goals. Indonesia is looking at 10,000 megawatts by 2025, and in Indonesia, it's another great transition ironies. Indonesia was a former member of OPEC. They got kicked out when their oil production declined, so Pertamina was the state-owned oil and gas giant, and they very quickly pivoted to move into the geothermal business. The Philippines also has amazing geothermal potential. Japan, too, they could meet half of their electricity needs with geothermal energy. And we found that right now it's used in 24 countries around the world, but there's 40 countries that are so aptly cited that geothermal could provide 100% of their electricity. So 40 countries, totaling about 900 million people. Hydropower is like geothermal. It's a stable source of energy. It's also geographically specific. More widespread than geothermal, hydropower is used in 150 countries around the world. There's a global capacity of 1 million megawatts. And when you look at rivers around the world, in industrial countries, our rivers are fairly dam saturated. There's not much potential to build new dams. Lower income countries are still expanding their hydropower, and that's where you see a lot of that growth. There's still a few hydropower frontiers that have not been developed. That includes the Congo River and a number of the rivers in the Himalayas. Hydropower tends to be a fairly costly choice if you're building a brand new large dam. But where I see the excitement for hydropower is actually there's 45,000 large dams around the world. Of those 45,000 large dams, only 8,600 are generating electricity. So just putting the right equipment on the remainder of the world's, the majority of the world's dams that are not providing power could be another important source of energy in this new economy. And then there's other ways to use water beneficially. One is pumped storage. Basically, say you're generating a lot of energy with your wind turbines or your solar panels. You can use that excess energy to push water up a hill and then let it come down when you need your energy. So that's a way to basically a kind of water battery. So I've been talking mostly about electricity so far, but the other major part of our energy economy is oil. We don't use oil as much here to produce electricity, but of course it's the backbone of our transportation economy. So what do we know about oil? Well, probably all of you remember this scene. It was from 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico, the Deepwater Horizon disaster, which ended up being the worst oil spill in US history. It went on for about 3 months before the situation was controlled and the oil stopped leaking into the delicate Gulf of Mexico ecosystem. BP eventually settled to pay about $20 billion for that disaster. But the world is still using more and more oil each year. So how are we going to get it? Well, we've found out that most of the world's so-called easy oil is getting tapped out. Those big fields, like in Saudi Arabia, the giant Ghawar field, where you stick a straw in the sand and you have a gusher. We're not finding those kind of fields anymore. We're using the fracking techniques we talked about before. We're mining tar sands in Canada when the price gets high enough to do so. So this, with the easy oil getting tapped up, our geologic realities are making it harder and harder to be using more oil. But while on the global front, oil use is climbing, in some countries, oil use has peaked or started to stabilize. And that's what we've seen in the US. So in the US, we're down from our highest oil use, or back up in recent years as gasoline costs have gone down. We've found people forget pretty quickly and go back to their old driving patterns. But there's a number of social trends that are pushing people away from driving. And there's technology changes. Vehicle efficiency has gone up incredibly, in part because of federal standards, federal CAFE standards. Urbanization, of course, means that people don't necessarily need to drive as much. Now 86% of the United States population is living in urban areas. And when you talk to young people, particularly young people living in cities around the world, they're not necessarily going out and driving the strip for entertainment. People now have their cell phones and other ways of socializing, so there's a bit of a culture change. Or young people are saying, look, I need a car to get around sometime, but I can just use Uber or Lyft or when I can't ride my bike, or I don't want to own a car because then I can't check my Facebook at the same time as driving. So I think because of people's choices, because of technology, and because of policy, the US at least may have hit that peak oil use, or may be on sort of a plateau for now. And I think it'll start to go down very quickly in the future because of this new trend of electrifying transportation. And in our new green energy economy, this has to be the way to go if we want to be able to run an economy on renewable sources of energy, mostly wind, solar, water, geothermal. You will need your transportation to be electrified. And the good news is it's becoming increasingly cheaper to do that. Solar costs, wind costs, those have gone down. So have the cost of batteries. And so having a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle powered by solar panels that you park it under every night has become increasingly cheap within the next few years. If you buy an electric vehicle, you buy a solar system, and you buy battery storage capacity, analysts at UBS, the Swiss bank, project that that will pay for itself within an 8-year period of time, after which you have your energy source and you're driving around for free. Currently, plugging in an electric vehicle still gives you a cost per gallon equivalent at about 70 cents per gallon, so it's still fairly cheap to drive around in an electric vehicle. And every major automaker now is working on hybrid electric or plug-in hybrid electric cars. If they're not, they're very quickly left behind. Just the picture here, the top one is actually a Tesla rendering of their gigawatt factory. The idea is to have a factory that can be churning out solar panels fully powered by energy from the sun. So that doesn't exist quite yet, but that is the vision for the future, and they're moving pretty rapidly. So just to review, this great transition is being driven by a few factors. We talked about some of the geologic limitations. We talked about some of the social trends. We've talked a lot about the economic drivers as well. And this chart here I like a lot because this is showing the historical average levelized cost of these various sources of energy. And I hope it's legible. What you can see is the big drop you have is with utility scale solar. It was quite expensive as recently as 2009. That's when I got my system installed. And you can see how it falls quite a bit. Nuclear, the pink line, is the one that's actually going up over time. So that just is a quick review and a comparison. We talked about ways to generate electricity. Of course, the best way to save energy is to use less overall. The potential for efficiency is enormous. The efficiency measures enacted by just 11 countries since the 70s saved $740 billion in a year alone. At Earth Policy Institute, we calculated that if we switched most of the world's lighting from traditional incandescence to compact fluorescence, you could close about 270 coal-fired power plants. If you switch to LEDs now, which are the costs have come down for those, you can close a lot more coal-fired power plants. And the picture there is from Japan's Top Runner program. It's their efficiency program. What the Japanese government does is it looks around at the market. It says, what's the best refrigerator, what's the best computer, what's the best vacuum cleaner, how in terms of efficiency, and then it uses the best to set the standards for the future so that they have continuous improvement, and that's why we look to Japan when we want to buy a lot of new technologies. So how will we accelerate this transition? Well, it's moving very fast. The falling costs, of course, are important. The efficiency is, And historically, policies have been very important. Costs are the bigger driver now, but additional policies can move things more quickly, balancing the playing field. Because right now, fossil fuels still are subsidized around the world at a tune of about $600 billion each year, which is many times more than any subsidies for renewables. So how do we help balance this playing field? How do we correct for this major market failure that is allowing for the spewing of carbon dioxide, other polluting gases into the atmosphere for free? Well, the idea is to put a price on this carbon somehow. So our friend Øystein Dali, he's the former vice president of Exxon for Norway and the North Sea. And he said socialism collapsed because it did not allow the market to tell the economic truth. Capitalism may collapse because it does not allow the market to tell the ecological truth. So what is this saying? We're subsidizing the pollution that's making children and the elderly sick with asthma. It's reducing crop yields. It's melting ice caps and glaciers, acidifying the oceans, and taking the planet into climate zone unlike any humans have ever known. So this map from the World Bank shows the places around the world that have recognized this and tried to put a price on carbon in various ways, either through a cap and trade legislation where you basically set a limit on how much carbon pollution you can put into the atmosphere and have a market to trade and have a fluctuating price, or a far simpler method, which is a carbon tax or free. The idea is to tax you tax each ton of carbon dioxide emitted, and you can make this tax revenue neutral, meaning that you can offset the tax on carbon with a reduction in income taxes or provide a dividend to people. So instead of having income tax, you can have a carbon tax what you burn, not what you earn. We've seen the places where carbon taxes have been enacted, like British Columbia. They set an economy-wide carbon tax in 2008. Within a couple years, their per-person consumption of gasoline and other petroleum products fell 15%, 3 times the national average, while their economic growth kept pace with the rest of the country. Ireland has also had success with a carbon tax, able to grow their economy while shrinking their emissions. And so this map's showing now there's carbon pricing initiatives in some 42 countries around the world, 25 subnational jurisdictions, and all told, it's about 88 gigatons of the carbon dioxide equivalent, representing 14.6% of global greenhouse gas emissions will be under one of these schemes in the future. Other movements attempting to accelerate the transition are the divestment movement. Groups like the campaign is basically encouraging companies, churches, schools to divest from any investment in coal, oil, natural gas, in the fossil fuels. So some of the early leaders in this movement were the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. They originally got their money from Standard Oil, so it's kind of funny that now they're pulling away from fossil fuels. Norway's $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund, which got its money drilling for oil in the North Sea, is now in the divestment group. California is selling off all their coal stocks because the state was losing so much money with their costs from their coal stocks that they pulled out of their holdings. And just recently, New York City's Mayor de Blasio announced that New York City was pulling their $200 billion, divesting from fossil fuels in their $200 billion pension fund. And this New York City is also suing ExxonMobil, Chevron, several other major oil companies for the damages they caused by climate change. And I just saw in the news recently that Paris may do the same thing. So this is moving very quickly. The point of this movement is that the science is telling us that in order to avoid the most dangerous climate change, we need to leave 80% of the world's coal underground, half of the oil, and a third of our natural gas. So it doesn't make sense for our investments to be there ethically for future generations. And it's also, in many cases, those are not economic, they're not winning money either. So when coal stocks are performing poorly, it's pretty easy to convince people to pull out of them. Then there's also some corporate green power purchases. This is a picture of Google. This was an abandoned oil and gas field. Now Google turned it into an 82 megawatt solar farm. This is a roof of Walmart. Walmart's CEO decided he would cover Walmart roofs with solar. He said, the former CEO, Bill Simon, said in 2014, it's a business decision. The renewable energy we buy meets or beats prices from the grid, and that's why Walmart is going solar. Other large investment institutions like Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs are channeling tens of $billions into renewable energy. Billionaires are also betting big on renewables. We have Warren Buffett, who has already invested $15 billion in solar and wind, saying there's another $15 billion ready to go, and on and on. So, to sum up, looking at our new green energy economy, we're looking at a low carbon, low risk economy. We find that building wind and solar power capacity is quicker, more affordable than building nuclear or large-scale fossil plants without the associated risks. Unlike fossil fuels, energy from the wind, from the sun, from the earth is clean, it's inexhaustible. You don't run out of the fuel, the costs are falling fast. Every country can take advantage of its own mix of renewable energy. Our old energy economy, it was tightly controlled by those who held the fossil fuel deposits. The new energy economy, it's much more democratic. We're seeing a shakeup of this traditional energy distribution model. Rooftop solar panels that power our homes or recharge car batteries, they deliver a degree of energy independence that's not been known for generations. And so we see these as results we can live with. We have cleaner air, cleaner water, a more stable climate, and I'll wrap up with a quote from The Great Transition. My colleagues, my long-term mentor Lester Brown and colleagues Matt Roney and Emily Adams, we wrote our conclusion, the energy transition will change not only how we view the world, but also how we view ourselves. Coal plant smokestacks that dirty the air and alter the climate will be replaced by solar panels on our rooftops and wind turbines turning gracefully in the distance. Welcome to the clean energy era. Thank you.
All right, now you're welcome to come forward if you have questions, especially students. And here comes a student right here. So you'll recognize them in turn, and we'll see what you come up with.
Great.
What they come up with.
So I'm all for clean energy, but I'm just wondering what this is going to do to countries whose exports are fossil fuels and like coal related. Like, what's that going to do for them in the long run? Because they rely on us purchasing these things, and like that's a cultural and economic need for them. So what in the long run are we going to do about the discrepancies and like just the differences in economies and stuff that's going to cause?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you. Did everybody hear the question? It was a great question about what happens to some of those countries that are now exporting coal or other fossil fuels. What happens to the discrepancy if we move to this new energy economy? Is that what you're asking? And I think this is one area where we see a lot of advantages go to the those who act quickly or act quickly enough. In some cases, if you acted too quickly, like Germany, we can all thank Germany for putting together their renewable energy policies, because it was a fairly big drain on their economy, yet they're still a world-leading manufacturing power, but they're part of the reason why we can get cheaper solar panels now. Tiny Denmark invested early in wind industry, and for many, many years, if you wanted to buy special wind components, you look to Denmark, nowhere else in the world. So what's happening now to Saudi Arabia, or gosh, now our country, right? We're now exporting petroleum. We're not a net exporter. We're still using more than we're producing. But if we start to rely very heavily on fuels that won't last forever, I think we'll see economic troubles in the future. So those that delay will be in trouble. I think, however, most of the forward-thinking economies around the world are asking the same question. So, for instance, Saudi Arabia, for a long time, the world's leading oil export, controlling sort of OPEC, and they will lose some of their economic power, but they're investing very heavily now in solar energy because they want to be able to, be powering the rest of the Middle Eastern economy, or even power going from the Middle East to Europe. So they're moving quickly that way. Countries that have been very dependent on petroleum as the energy economy electrifies, I think they'll be in trouble if they did not invest in their institutions. So I think there's like a big difference between, say, an Oman that put their money back into social programs or education programs instead of like a Nigeria that's taken all of their oil wealth and not done much for their society to help build their society with it. So there will be, it's not everybody will win from an exporting and manufacturing point of view, yet everybody can take part in moving to this energy economy. And thus, I think what we see, we write about in the book, are these stranded assets, this oil, this coal, this natural gas that will be left underground. I think the quicker you divest from those assets, the better you'll be off as a country, as a company, and moving forward, trying to move to the next thing.
Oh, were you next? I'm sorry. Good evening, Ms. Larson. Ms. Larson and I have already exchanged some emails, so she knows I'm here as the loyal opposition. I regret that some handouts that I had scheduled to bring here tonight did not arrive in time for you people to have before the presentation. They did arrive, however, and I'd like you to pick them up. They're straight out the door when you leave. And I want to mention one thing. I'm a best-selling author of 5 pro-science books. And because of the seriousness of climate change, I have decided, the book is selling for $26 on Amazon. I've decided to make it available free worldwide, and it's all about energy issues and climate change. Anybody all the information is on the table, stop and look at it. I do have 50 questions for you, but we'll settle for one if that's all right. And it's a bit antagonistic, and I apologize for that. But how do you justify, for example, windmills that are worldwide killing millions of birds and bats every year? Those are government statistics. At a time especially when Zika, malaria, and dengue fever are rising. I have never gotten a decent answer from the Sierra Club, the Nature Conservancy, Greenpeace, and I think we need to talk about that. Thank you. I'm going to have a seat. I have a back problem.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, as a lover of nature and the environment, I too had the same question about windmills. What about the birds? Some of you may be old enough to remember one of the earlier wind projects in California on the Altamont Pass. It was the the old school style of wind turbines. They spin really fast, and they put that project up right in the migratory pathway of raptors. So these windmills were basically like Cuisinarts for the birds. It was it was an awful project. And the wind industry has been dealing with that legacy since. I think that's a major question for many people. What they have tried to do is address it, one, by not citing a wind project in a migratory pathway. There's a lot more due diligence done on the environmental impact assessment before citing a project to be out of those migratory pathways. Two, the newer wind turbines, they're much larger, but they also spin more slowly, so birds don't get necessarily chewed up in them. So it's a question of siting projects. There's also ways to actually set up bird deterrence, whether it's lights or sound or that sort of thing. They seem to have done pretty well on the bird problem. And in looking at the studies, nationwide, more birds are killed by buildings, power lines, and house cats than wind energy. So overall, I agree. I think it's something that we need to take seriously, but it's a problem that the industry is working hard to address, and I think you have to also compare it with what will happen to the birds if climate change is allowed to spiral out of control. Scientific studies now are looking at the range within certain species that can live are now moving because of rising temperatures faster than some species themselves can migrate. If you're a bird that lives on the top of a mountain and your mountain starts to heat up, there's nowhere you can go. Other species are able to move as temperature and climate zones change, but some are not. Estimates for species loss with runaway global warming are range from about 30% of species could be in serious trouble up to half in the near term. So I think we have to choose carefully and choose the technologies that can move us out of that dangerous climate regime quick enough for the benefit of birds and all other species.
Thank you for your work and your talk here about basically it's the supply side of how we use energy, not the demand side. And I've been off grid for almost 20 years with a small solar array in town here. And I couldn't have done it until I solved the problem of how I used my energy. And the biggest user of energy in your home is your refrigerator or your freezers. And if you can solve that problem, congratulations, you live in Duluth. You have 9 months out of the year where you can keep your food cool in a cooler outside. It coincides with the least productive time for solar electricity, the winter time. So summertime, I've got more than enough electricity, and I'm able to use an electric lawnmower, which is eliminating one of the most polluting forms of gasoline engines, the small gas lawnmower engine. So there are little things that you can do to reduce your energy use, and if you can reduce it enough, you can start producing energy and meet those needs without relying on large intertied grid systems and everything else like that. So that's basically what can be done. Reduce your demand, then you can live within the supply.
Thank you very much for that point. I think that's the other side of the coin, certainly, is reducing demand, and it's amazing how much potential there is. I think each person, you can kind of make it a game for yourself. I don't know if those of you who are living in dorms or apartments, you might not get to see your electric bill, but if you do get an electric bill, watch how it fluctuates each month and challenge yourself. I bet you can get it to go down just by making pretty small changes, getting rid of, they call those vampires, those appliances that basically you see, whenever you see those little LED lights all the time, that means those appliances are sucking energy all the time. So figure out how to get, do you remember that show Buffy the Vampire Slayer? They make power strips now. We call them the Buffy because you basically say you have your computer, but it's attached to your printer and your other monitor and all your stuff. You can get a power strip that when you turn off the one appliance, the main one, it turns everything else off, and you've slayed those so-called energy-sucking vampires. So there's so much room in efficiency to use a lot less energy. And with the electrifying of the transportation system, I think that's the other big efficiency gain, because just by their nature, electric engines are 4 to 5 times more efficient than internal combustion engines. So just by switching your car, more of the energy is being used to move you forward along the road instead of just getting burnt up as waste heat. So an electrified transportation system is also more efficient.
I wanted to say thank you for a great presentation, and I'm going to ask somewhat of a self-serving question because I represent the Citizens Climate Lobby. And fundamental to your transition, the point you made was that putting a price on carbon is really essential to help move in that direction, I believe. And I know that my family just signed up for solar, but we made the decision because the tariff just went on solar panels, and we were asked to move now or pay a higher price, so we did that. One of the things that I was going to ask you is, can you comment on how we can help move in this direction, in particular with the current political winds, no pun, and how you would encourage people to help get this done by putting a price on carbon?
Sure. Yeah, I actually ended up at the first national meeting of the Citizens Climate Lobby. So I'm a fan of the organization. If you don't know about Citizens Climate Lobby, it's worth looking up. I was actually reading an interview recently with a member of Congress who was talking about what gets other members of Congress in favor of doing something about climate change, and he actually mentioned Citizens Climate Lobby as one of the big reasons. What the group of people he's hearing from, they're writing letters to the editor, they're writing letters to their Congress people, their state legislators. I would say don't get discouraged at national politics right now. Privately, of course, you talk to most members of Congress, and they believe in climate change. They know it's a problem. The problem is their next election campaign is being funded by big oil, big gas, some other coal, some fossil fuel interests. They have to pander to that. So that's why anyone who cares about the environment, their energy, they should care about things like Citizens United ruling by the Supreme Court that moved a lot of corporate money very easily into politics. Pay attention to those kind of things and see what you can do in terms of writing letters, lobbying to get that money out of elections, because it does make a difference in what people do, even voting against their own self-interests. But that's the national level. Local level, I think after Donald Trump announced that he would pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement that every other country in the world has signed on to, pulling out is kind of silly because it's a non-binding agreement anyway, so it's largely symbolic. But after that happened, we see state governors, city mayors, general people, businesses saying, we're going to make up the difference, we're going to move forward, we're going to have those cuts happen in terms of our carbon emissions. And I think there's new energy actually at the local front in the leadership vacuum we have in Washington, D.C. So you can always get involved locally, make things happen. Whatever issue it is that you care about, there's a way to get a group of people together and figure out how to make change from the simplest, going out and making sure you vote every single time there's an election, to just being informed and informing other people.
Hi. You spoke about the concentrated wealth that comes with the fossil fuel industry, certainly owning the resources, but also our investor-owned monopoly utilities. So my question is, what new ownership strategies and models do you see emerging with renewable energy? And in particular, what new possibilities for local community-owned energy? And do you think that the great transition of energy will also help us change then the growing disparity of wealth distribution?
Thank you. I should ask you what your thoughts are on the matter. I think it's a great question. I think one thing that I've been to Denmark a few times over the last handful of years, and when you talk to people about how they never had the NIMBY problem with their wind turbines and why they get so excited about renewable energy, they say it's because our community owns it. It's because it's our energy. We're making it ourselves. And so the community members literally will get together and come up with a fund to buy their wind turbine, and they feel a sense of pride and they feel excited that it's in their community, and they can then become a little microgrid, take themselves off the national grid, or feed into the national grid and be part of something bigger. I think those opportunities are becoming more abundant, and I think it's also producing a lot of unlikely allies. Have you all heard of the Tea Party coalition in politics? Well, have you heard of the Green Tea Party? That they got together to make sure that when the utilities, you talk to utilities now across the country, they're panicking. They see the utility death spiral, their traditional model of making money by selling you more and more energy. They see that going away. They know that they won't be able to be in business the same way in 10 years and 20 years. They know that they need to change. So they're panicking and trying different things in a number of states, making you pay extra if you have your own solar panels. And that's when the Greens and the Tea Party get together and said, let me put my solar panels on my roof. Let me make my own energy. I think we'll see a lot more of those, the community-based energy, both in industrial communities, industrial country communities, like in the United States, and in villages where maybe they never had power before. I mean, how amazing would that be to pool together money so that you have a source of light for a school that never had it before, for a playing field, for a library, for study. I think it can be very, very empowering to allow people to produce their own energy. So I look forward to watching it evolve, and I think there'll be new models of community togetherness.
We'll have 3 more real quick questions, right? And then we'll go out and get energized in the lobby for more conversation. Okay?
So aside from the renewable energy that the wind farms produce, does the cumulative carbon footprint of the wind farm construction, from like the mining of the steel, the burning of the diesel for the earthwork operations, and construction waste, really worth the energy?
Thank you for the question. I was actually hoping someone would ask that. I didn't even plant him in the audience. I came prepared with an answer. This is a chart from Mark Jacobson at Stanford University. He has a team that's put together a plan. They started in the United States looking at various states, and now they have a plan for every state, and now they have a plan for countries around the world to move to 100% WWS, wind, water, and solar. And so if you're interested in seeing how those plans look for different countries around the world, look him up. Mark Jacobson is kind of interesting. But this is a chart he put together. It's from a range of various studies. There's a lot of studies that looked at the full life cycle carbon emissions from various electricity sources, and it incorporates everything from the steel for the windmills, the concrete beds that they sit on, to all the components and the parts. And so you can see this chart if you're comparing energy sources just from a carbon emission standpoint. Coal is clearly a major loser. and that's coal CCS, that's coal with carbon capture and storage. It still has incredibly, even if you're capturing the carbon that's coming out of the smokestack, there's a lot of carbon still embedded in the process from the mining. Did you know that I think it's 40% or so of our rail travel is actually moving coal? So once you get off coal, you're not only not burning that coal, but you're not burning the diesel to drive the trains to move the coal. It has big effects through the economy. So from life cycle carbon emissions, coal is clearly a loser. Nuclear generally doesn't fare terribly well, though the low estimates that come from the nuclear industry make it look pretty rosy. That, of course, is not including if there's an accident or if there's any sort of proliferation decimating a city or something that you have to rebuild. That would certainly raise the carbon emissions, not to mention cause other social strife. So wind actually, to answer your question, wind fares fairly well on a carbon emissions perspective, pretty much the best out of all the sources, even from the high estimates in the range of the studies. Thanks.
Somewhat related question to that is, you know, in our area of the world right now, there's a big debate about bringing materials out of the earth. Copper, nickel, these are materials that are used extensively to build new power generation, like solar. You have to have wires to connect the solar, wind turbines. So kind of a double-edged question, the supply chain for creating all of this new resource, going from 0.8% to 50% solar or whatever it is, how does the world keep up with creating a new capacity, and how important are those resources such as we have here or in Russia, or where is it going to come from, and how do we do that in a way that is not also further detriment?
Thank you. I think with everything, it's a question of trade-offs. So if we want to keep living our highly energy-intensive lifestyles the way we do and let those 1.3 billion people without electricity gets close to our some semblance of that lifestyle, the world will keep using energy. Electrifying the economy has efficiencies built into it, so ultimately global energy use can go down, but still, solar panels, you need your silicon, wind turbines need their steel, you need your concrete. So except for efficiency, there's really no free lunch. I think everything is going to, it takes energy to make energy. It takes rare earth minerals. It takes copper, as I understand, is a serious issue in this community now. I think we need to figure out ways we can do better at mining, the ways we can do less. I think the technologies will continue to evolve, but it comes down to a series of choices. I think I do have some friends now actually in the mining industry, and they're working with mining companies to figure out how you can reclaim sites. And some sites, once they're spoiled, they can't be reclaimed. You certainly can't turn anything back into its original pristine nature. But there's ways to do things better. There's ways to pick sites. So I think we're going to have to keep asking that question with every new technology and figure things out. But I don't see it as a way not to move forward, because we know our current business as usual is taking us into a very dangerous scenario. And so we need to change overall the life cycle estimates of overall environmental impact, show that renewables are winning out. There may be ways to do it better. The exciting thing is that investing in these technologies, investing in the great transition, it's not like an oil well or a mine that will be, the fuel itself will be depleted. I think this renewable energy economy ultimately can last. It's a lasting economy. It's something that can last as long as the earth itself, as long as we do it carefully.
Okay, our last question. Keep waiting.
Your presentation has been very informative, enlightening, and I think we've been given a wonderful perspective on a global the global transition that you talk about. And I don't have a question, but I do have a comment about something that's happening locally that I feel is turning us backwards in terms of the transition. You mentioned that we are moving toward renewables and we're moving away from fossil fuels. And any new construction really is important to be in the renewable realm. And I'm not sure how many people know, but our local utility that supplies our power is proposing to build a brand new natural gas powered plant in Superior. And it's something that you might want to think about, whether you agree with that or not. And if you don't agree with it, there is a hearing coming up on that very topic with the Public Utilities Commission, and it's on February 28th at the Inn on Lake Superior. I have information at a table out there, so if you'd like information on that, please stop by. And thank you again very much.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here. You have such a great, involved community. As Earth Policy Institute President Lester Brown said, we did a book called Plan B a few years ago based on the premise, Plan A, business as usual is not working, Plan B is the alternative. In that he said, saving civilization is not a spectator sport, so thank you all for being involved, and I look forward to talking more with you all. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Good job. And I certainly echo that. Thank you all for coming. Let's adjourn to the lobby and have a piece of celery and a chocolate chip cookie and continue the conversation.